Well, hey, welcome to episode of the Gig Harbor Flycast, and we have Jon Covich on today with us. And before we get started, so
yes, Blake.
I had already sent Jon some questions ahead of time just so there weren't too many curveballs being thrown, but I have something for you.
Oh, you do?
I do.
God, this is a first.
I mean, we just appreciate you being on the podcast.
Oh,
So I got a couple Thomas & Thomas rods here for you, a Zone 905 and an Avant 906.
Yes.
And so just with our appreciation of you being on the podcast, I just want to give.
So these are rods that you borrowed from me that I've forgotten about.
Yeah, but if
you could have kept forever, and I would just never remembered.
But you had forgotten about them.
I know it. It's unbelievable. And I thought you were actually giving me something.
I was wondering when you were going to actually ask him, but I'm like
terrible about it.
I think he doesn't remember that he loaned those rods out. I mean, they're brand new Thomas & Thomas rods with the stickers on them.
I didn't remember that. And I'm going to give you grief, too. This is a chance for me to give you grief. I've been watching the Gig Harbor vlogs from Cuba, and it's like you're a Sage advertisement. I mean, how much are you getting paid, right?
They did give me a free rod for that trip.
I think, they took care of you. Yeah, Nicely done. Nicely done. Thanks for my rods back, Blake.
You're welcome. Well, so Jon Covich is a fly fishing rep, has been in the fly fishing industry for like 150 years. He actually invented fly fishing.
How did I get old suddenly? It did happen.
Right. So, but I mean, how did you get in the industry? How did that, where are you from? I'm
from here, I'm actually from Lake Tapps.
When how did you learn how to fly fish?
God, it's a long story. I was thinking about it because you'd sent me those questions.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it's really interesting how life goes, isn't it? Right?
It sure is.
My favorite thing when I talk to my kids about, all this stuff and life and education and jobs and everything, I always tell them my favorite saying, which is men plan and God laughs, which I just think is awesome. Right? Because I think of all the things that I did when I was younger and my education, and now here I'm a fly fishing rep. So it's just crazy. But it was kind of one of those preparation meeting opportunity things. I've been a salesman basically my whole life. I was a salesman when I was a kid. I split wood and delivered wood, around the neighborhood and Lake
That's
Tapps.
Where all of our trees went.
Exactly.
Jeez.
That kind of stuff. And I ended up working at Nordstrom. And so I kind of had that background, and I'd done some college, et cetera. And then I got into this whole fly fishing thing, which is another story. And I ended up quitting the real world, and I went to work for Kaufman's in downtown Seattle.
Okay.
And so that's sort of when I became, I was in the industry just like you are today, working behind the counter in a shop.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long before I was starting to see in the reps. George Cook was a rep then. Brian O'Keefe was one of the reps then.
George worked at Kaufman's.
He did work at Kaufman's, sort of Mark Bale from Sage, a lot of those guys.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was seeing these reps come in, and I was like, I could do that. I'm a salesman. And I became friendly with O'Keefe because he was the guy that, he had the personality, but also he was the traveler, he was the photographer, and all the stuff that I was interested in. And so I started kind of peppering him with questions, and pretty soon he was like, okay, so what are you really saying? You want to be a rep? And I was like, yeah, how do I do this? And he was awesome. He also kind of took advantage of me, and I don't mean in a bad way. He had some lines that he recognized that he could get some help from me.
Sure.
I had experience in clothing sales. He was repping Barber clothing, Barber, the wax cotton stuff from Britain. And he didn't want to sell it.
That's like the Gore-Tex of the 1800s.
It was, wax cotton. It's still all the stuff you see in any advertisement you see of anybody fishing a chalk stream in England. There they are in their stupid wax cotton coat. I'm sorry, they're stupid. So Brian was like, hey, you can call on these clothing stores because I really don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And then he gave me some of his other lines, honestly. That, they were small. I repped Silver Creek Press. Do you know Silver Creek Press?
No.
That makes calendars. They still make them.
Right. Yeah.
I repped Seal Dry waders, which were the old rubber waders.
Sure.
I was making like $60 a month, Blake, as a sales rep. But loved it.
Man.
Loved it.
It's like owning a fly shop.
It was. And it was finally 6 months, something like 6 months to 8 months later when I got my first reel line. It was Able Reels. off Mabel Reels, and
okay.
I felt like I was really somebody suddenly. So anyway, that's a little bit about how I got started as a rep. Anyway,
that was back in the day when Able Reels were only $1,000.
Yeah, exactly. No, that would have been, so that was like the summer of '93.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how long ago that was. So I've been and I started repping in '92. So yeah, I'm almost 30 years into it. It's crazy.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Crazy how things go.
Well, so how did you learn who taught you how to fly fish?
Well,
Who exposed you to
you
that?
know, it's funny. I just recently had this question come up, and it made me think of all that stuff, But it made me think of being a kid, and I fished my ass off when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right. I lived near Lake Taft, as I said, and I didn't have anybody in my family that was really into fishing, and so I just did it on my own. I had a spinning rod, and I would go with my buddies and I would cast it was a Red Devil, was kind of the lure of the day, or a Mep spinner. And so I fished for kokanee and all that stuff. And it's just incredible memories. But I always knew that I had a grandfather who was a fly fisherman, came from Scotland. I've got a picture of him to this day.
He's the real deal.
He's the real deal.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of him. You can see his bamboo rod. He's smoking he got a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, tweed jacket, the whole thing. So I knew that I had that in my past.
That would have been like your first barber customer.
It would have been so cool. And unfortunately, he died when I was 4, I think. And he was one of those guys. He had congenital heart, disease or something. And he would have just gone in and got the tubes cleaned.
So
today,
you just
right?
have photos and.
Yeah, I've got
so
a very
then it just makes
little,
it even more of
I've
like a legend.
got a little bit of just a tiny memory of him.
Okay.
But anyway, I knew that about him. So I kind of always had that in the back of my mind that someday I should learn how to fly fish. And then when I was older, I guess just out of college, I started steelhead fishing like a madman.
Yeah.
Right? But sand shrimp and cured eggs, that whole thing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Hardcore. Loved it. Really got into it. My good fishing buddy, Mark Summers. Mark, if you're out there, this is for you, buddy. He got me into that. And then he started fly fishing. And I was like, hey, I've always wanted to do that. And so he sort of taught me. And I did an extension course at the UW. Dana, what's Dana's last name? I might still be teaching it. Anyway, did that, and then it was full tilt.
Yep.
You know the story.
All in.
Crazy. People hated even to be around me because it's all I talked about. I was telling the story.
I think there's probably some other people out there that can.
Well, I'll just tell you this. I was working at Nordstrom.
Yeah.
When I really, really went over the top, right? And I was working in an office and
wearing your waders.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would come in after the weekend.
Yeah.
And of course, I had been someplace fly fishing, and people were like, really, we got to hear about this, And I was having my secretary. We kind of shared a secretary, and I was having her type up stories that I was trying to submit to stupid, fly fishing magazines on the side. I was paying her a little bit on the side and stuff. It was completely over the top, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome. So, I mean, you're kind of now known as the Cuba guy. We even have our Cuba mugs here, and
proud of it. Love it.
So I mean, fly fishing travel. It's goes along with being a fly fishing industry rep. Mm-hmm. You're repping
to a degree,
repping travel. But how did you get into travel? Like, what was that first trip you did that was outside the United States?
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, if you're talking about fishing, it was to the Bahamas in the early '90s, something like that. But before that, and I think this is sort of where things come together, right? I got into travel long before that. Long before I was really a hardcore fly fisherman.
Okay.
So I did one of those things where I was trying to kind of find myself. I'd done a couple of years of college, had no idea where I wanted to go next, and I was working a job that I didn't really love. And I kind of said, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go travel.
Yeah.
And so I saved money for a year. This is like, again, in the early 80s, and I saved $7,500. That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and I
for a
remember
young
showing
person.
my dad, I was telling my dad what I was going to do, and he was I remember him saying to me, you're going to quit your job to go travel? You got a good job, right? And I said, no, I hate my job, Dad. I can't stand it. It'll be fine. And he just couldn't get his head around it.
Sure.
And I went to Europe and I traveled. I was gone 15 months.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
I was everywhere, all of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, North Africa. I worked on a kibbutz in Israel for 2 months, 2.5 months, something like that.
Wow.
So I kind of got the travel bug after that. And then I was smart. I married a flight attendant, right? And so we got all those travel benefits. So, Fran and I, and my wife and I and our boys have traveled a lot. So we've been really lucky.
Yeah.
But all that sort of ties into, what I'm doing right now. It's a story of how life comes together for you, right?
Right. So, yeah. I'm reading a great book right now, and it's written by a young person, and it's kind of weird being able to say that. But
you're officially
one of the things that I love about it is that in the book, she essentially squashes the idea of that you just need to find your passion, but it's more about what are you interested in, and just start with something small, and then build from there. Because once you find when you find someone who has passion about something, whether it's a social cause or about, it's because they've built on that thing. They weren't born passionate to do X, Y, and Z or whatever, but it's just, you kind of just find yourself along the way. And it just really resonated with me because, I wasn't always passionate about fly fishing, but
and here you are. Look at what you got.
Here I am.
By the way, how cool is what you have?
Yeah.
Just by the way, a little shout out to you.
Pretty lucky.
Well, I remember coming into, the shop over here, right?
Okay, no, we need to.
Are we gonna segue?
Whoa. We need to roll back a minute. So when I started, I had started online in 2004, and we were running just an online only deal called Wilderness Angler. And I remember my first meeting with you. I'd never met you before. Got your number.
I was a total dick, wasn't I?
So we met at this coffee shop down the street, and you were really nice, but you just kind of looked at me, and I appreciated this, but you're just dead honest. You said, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't open a fly shop. There's not room for a fly shop in Puget Sound, and this is a really tough industry, and you shouldn't do this. And
see, I was right, wasn't I, Blake?
Well, my life would have been quite different if I had listened to your advice. But I appreciated the honesty about it.
But
okay, so this was in February of 2009.
That's when it was? Really?
Yeah.
Wow,
so
really?
Our country was in the midst of
recession.
It was a great time to find new employees.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So, I think if I hadn't already had like an online business for 5 years,
right,
and then was just kind of transitioning to brick and mortar. If I was just trying to start something right out like that, it would have been pretty tough.
No, I think that I've done that multiple times, right? You're not the only person that I've had that conversation with, because there were a lot of people that were pretty starry-eyed about this sport.
Sure.
Right, and because they loved it, they thought it'd be a good idea.
And river runs through it.
Yeah, right. And a lot of those were, they were passionate guys with a dream, and and they had to open a shop in, let's call it like it is, Klamath Falls, Oregon, or Tri-Cities here in Washington, because there was room in those places.
Yeah.
And those are tough businesses, but really, you're a cool success story. I gotta hand it to you. I do tell your story a bit, not just with the retail portion of things, how far you come here, but with the travel thing, right? We always talk about this as a business, getting in the travel business, and I always say it's like the clothing business, right? Maybe you've heard me say that. I think it's the same.
Yeah.
Right? You have to start somewhere. You got to start slow and do it right, and grow it and plant the seed and all that sort of stuff. And now here you are going on, how many trips do you go in a year? 3 or 4 cool trips?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, turning around next. Yeah. You and I leave like within a couple days of each other, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm on Tuesday night.
Next Tuesday night?
Yeah.
I leave next Wednesday night.
Yeah, there you go. It's awesome, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so congratulations. I think it's super cool.
Hey, thanks. Cheers.
You betcha.
So, it's been an awesome ride for sure, because it's been over 10 years now, and one of the things that I've learned and grown in appreciation over the years is that not all reps really tell you the truth all the time.
No, I don't know what you're talking about, Blake.
They want to sell stuff, but
yeah.
So I mean, I just appreciated you, especially right out of the gate, being a little bit upfront and honest about instead of just trying to load me up with some stuff and call it as it is. But
well, we're all salesmen, right? I mean, we do share that, and so we're supposed to be out selling our product. But I learned a lesson really early on. Actually, before I got into this business, I lied to a customer once. I mean, it wasn't an outright lie. It was just that I didn't present everything, right? Sure. I was selling copiers. That's how. I mean, I was 20 years old. And I was making actually really good money, you know, but it was that hardcore door-to-door sort of, sales gig. And I don't know, telling this story. I don't know if I've ever told anybody the story, but I met this great gal that, she was the head of, she ran the business. I think it was a nursing home up in North Seattle, and they needed a new copier.
Yeah.
And we had this great new copier, the 145R. Still remember it. Yeah. $15,000, huge sale, right? I mean, back then. And she needed it. She had all those requirements. And then she said, "This will do double-sided copies, right?" And I said, "Sure will."
Yeah. When you take the paper out and flip it over.
Yeah, that's what you had to do, right? But not all machines would do it.
Right.
And sure enough, she called me, like 3 or 4 months later, and she said, "Hey, guess what? You told me this thing would do double-sided copies. I have to run a newsletter every month. It's not doing it. It's jamming up. After 30 or 40 prints, I've got to do 1,000. I learned my lesson because I went to her business for the next 2 years, every, the first of the month, and I picked up her papers and I brought them to a print shop and made her newsletter for her. So I'm not, we all, again, we're salesmen,
sure,
but it's not worth it. In the long run, things come around because you do things the right way, right. I think. And, you appreciating honesty up front means that you'll trust me, I hope,
right,
when I come in with, someplace else to tell you about, right?
10 years later.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How
cool.
sappy is that story?
Yeah. Okay, so back to fly fishing travel. So your first travel trip fly fishing out of the States was to the Bahamas?
Yeah, right.
So that was like in the 90s? When was that?
Yeah. It was early 90s. And again, I was pretty influenced by O'Keefe. This is when I was still working at Kaufman's.
Yeah.
And Brian was, Brian's, Brian.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a super adventurous guy, super charismatic guy. And he was doing pretty edgy stuff, right? So one of the things he was doing back then was he was doing these kayak trips in the Bahamas. Right.
Yeah.
So, he'd just come back from this place. It was in the Berry Islands, Great Harbor Key.
Yeah. And
he'd brought a kayak down there after a few trips, and he had this program. And so I'm like, this sounds like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
We almost died. But it was awesome. It was a great adventure. I caught one bonefish. Didn't know what I was doing. Had no idea about, where they would be on what tides. And we were sitting out there burning coconuts in the night, getting eaten alive by no-see-ums.
So this is not a guided thing. This is
It wasn't. We had a guide for a day at the beginning.
Okay.
Surly Bahamian guide, man. He was a tough dude. What was his name? And then he ended up dropping us off. We kind of had this plan. And he brought us out there, towed the kayak out there, and dropped us off on this island. Right? And there we were. It was awesome. Loved it.
Yeah, sure.
Loved it. Did a couple more of those things. Believed O'Keefe a couple more times. Yeah.
Right. Until you're like, okay, Brian, I can see through
okay,
your
I'm off on my own, doing my own thing now. Right. No, but it got me started saltwater fishing. And then I went off and did some other stuff as well. But.
So other stuff as well, was that more in the Caribbean, or did you?
No, then it was sort of, I did some stuff in Alaska because I hadn't been there yet. And then my first, I think the one that really stands out with me is like my first really awesome international trip was New Zealand. It was the first time I went to New Zealand. And I was dating my soon-to-be wife, and we went and did that whole backpacking. She friends loved to backpack, and I loved to fly fish, and so we did these great treks on the South Island, like the Greenstone Caples trek, and suddenly I really got it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'd seen the photographs and I'd read about it, and I can tell everybody that until you see one of those pristine rivers on New Zealand South Island in person, man, you have never lived.
I haven't been to New Zealand yet.
It's really incredible. It really is. I mean, you're not going to go there and catch a ton of fish, but every one you're going to remember.
Right.
Every one you're going to remember, especially the ones you don't catch. Right.
Yeah, and I've heard that low fish density.
Yeah, it is incredibly low fish density.
Technical fishing.
Yeah.
I mean, describe it a little bit
Sure.
Because I just from dealing with customers coming into the fly shop and helping people with travel stuff. I mean, even though a lot of anglers know about New Zealand, there's not very many of them that have actually gone there and seen it. I mean, there's a lot of other, the Caribbean is Ascension Bay. I mean, stuff like that. Alaska,
sure.
I mean, that's definitely more
Sure.
popular. So,
well, New Zealand's, the things to say about it. Number one is it's really diverse, right? It's got the North Island, the South Island. They're pretty markedly different. Then when you look at the South Island itself, it's geographically, it's not a big island, right? It's smaller than Cuba is. We were talking about Cuba.
Yeah.
It's several hundred miles from north to south. I don't know exactly, but it's never wider than like 80 miles wide. Right? But it's got a mountain range that divides it north and south, called the Southern Alps. So on the west side of that is rainforest and glaciers and the whole bit. And the other side is high plains. And then on the east coast, it's sort of temperate with palm trees. So it's incredibly diverse just from, a question of habitat. And then, of course, you got lakes and rivers and all that goes along with that. So, you can go there as the most dirtbag traveler, right, like I was then, with a backpack and stay in the backcountry huts that they've got all over New Zealand. And that's worth a whole podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Good idea. There's so many the resources there for backcountry people that want to get out and do it on their own, hikers and anglers, is really amazing. There's no place in the world that's like that. And then they've got the opposite extreme. They've got some of the most beautiful lodges on the planet there with streams that are really for them, that a lot of those lodges have exclusives on, and then they got places that you can helicopter in, et cetera. So
I've heard about some of those.
Yeah, I mean, it can go crazy, right? Again, you can think of spending $5 a night in a hut,
right?
Or you can think of spending $8,000 for the week, right? So it's got a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And in terms of the fishing, right? I mean, I'm not going to surprise anybody by telling you about what the fishing is like there. But I think, you mentioned densities of fish. What are some good examples of densities of fish here in famous trout rivers? Do you know what the Yakima is? You might know.
I don't know. I mean, isn't it like 400 or 700 fish per mile or something?
No, I would imagine it's more. That would be my guess. That it's more. I mean, the bighorn is something like 5,000 or 6,000.
I mean, on the Yakima, that's how many I catch.
Yeah, right.
400 to 700 per mile per day.
Yeah, if you read, some of the famous fly fishing books on New Zealand, John Kent wrote two. They're very dry but very informational. They're good books if you want to go there. And he'll talk about density there, and he'll say things like 30 or 40 fish. per kilometer, which means maybe 50, 55 fish per mile, right? So completely different thing. But there aren't any small fish. Of course there are small fish. You just don't see them, right? They're all up in the feeder creeks, or they're up in the whitewater or wherever, because the big rainbow or the big brown that you're seeing in the tail out will eat them, right? But those are the fish that you're seeing, and so that's what's so cool about it, is that you're hiking typically upstream on clear rivers, and then you're seeing the pool ahead of you. It's a likely spot. You get a little bit closer, and you're like, hey, there's a fish in the tail. You see that, and you see it from hundreds of feet away, right?
Just because the water's so clear.
Yeah, And those fish are pretty. I mean, they're comfortable in their habitat. Of course, they're wary as well. They're wary of shadows. Of course, that's the big thing. Shadows and flash, because things eat them from above. Right.
Everywhere.
That's just right. Yeah. Exactly. So you got to be. Your first cast is always the cast that you got to get right. But I mean, seeing. You can do the same thing as I can. You can sit and watch a big brown trout and a tail out for 2 hours, right, without making a cast, because it's so cool.
Right.
So that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you catch that fish, or if you have some sort of interaction with that fish, meaning that it comes up and it almost takes your fly and then it doesn't. I mean, that's something again that you'll remember.
So
forever.
I mean, it's exclusively dry fly fishing.
No, it's not. It's certainly not exclusively dry fly fishing, but that's what's most famous there. And you could do that the whole time, right, and catch a bunch of fish. But you'll also go to a river where the water is gin clear, and you see that fish, and you think it's in 3 feet of water, but it's in 7 feet of water, right? And so there you'll fish maybe a dropper. You'll have a dry dropper, and it'll eat the dropper. Or you'll fish the straight nymph, no indicator, long leader, and have to just watch the fish, right? And I remember doing that on
See
a
the
river
white
in
of
the
their mouth.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
trying
We
to-
did that kind of the whole time on this backcountry stream, and that was what it was all about, right?
Yeah.
It was just that, and it was awesome. It was awesome. Barely fished dry flies at all, but it was the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I could live in New Zealand easily. I really could.
That's awesome. So then you've done some trips to Alaska, BC.
Yeah.
I know a lot of our listeners probably are familiar with those just because of our proximity, but South America is one that that one has a lot more mystery to it.
Yeah. Sure.
And even just kind of being around the fly shop and all that kind of stuff. I don't really know that much about South America, and it looks like I'm doing my first trip to South America next year.
Yeah, right.
So I'm super excited about you getting me all set up with that.
Yeah, we're
one.
gonna get you hooked up on that one.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So you've not been to Patagonia yet?
No,
or
I haven't.
Tierra del Fuego, anywhere down there?
I haven't.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, you think about it.
If you want to take me, I'm
Yeah.
I'm down
Well, we
to do it.
should. Again, I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't already know, but the diversity of South America is incredible, right? Because you've got the whole Amazon thing, right? So you've got Brazil and Bolivia and parts of Colombia and Peru, Ecuador, etc., where you've got peacock bass and golden dorado and payara and big catfish and pacu, all that stuff.
Yep.
And then you go the other direction. Suddenly, it's like you're in Southeast Alaska or British Columbia.
Sure.
When you get to Western Argentina and Chile, and with the Andes and the big rivers and the big lakes, it's really incredibly diverse and amazing. So you can get pure trout fishing in Patagonia, and then you go further south and you get sea run browns. You now can fish for kings in Chile, pretty reliable runs of kings. You can fish for steelhead that come out of the Atlantic in Argentina.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there for sure. I don't know how many times I've been, probably 12 or 15 times to South America, and I don't go enough. I really don't.
Sure.
I'm so into this Cuba thing.
Well, we're talking about a continent.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
So, so let's talk about trout fishing. Argentina, Chile.
Yeah.
Because we have some great trout fishing in North America, right?
Sure.
Wyoming, Montana.
Yeah.
We have. So, in comparison to good fishing in Montana, like when you're there peak season, compare that with South America, where in areas where anglers would typically go.
I would say it's comparable. Actually, if you're really getting out, if you're going to places in Montana, Wyoming, where you're not I use the Bighorn for example. The Bighorn's got thousands of fish, but it's also got hundreds of boats. So if you go to remote places, right, in our American West and have great fishing, that's actually what Patagonia is like, right? So, I remember early on we talked about this, right? I think you tried to plan a trip, trout fishing, to South America, right?
Definitely explored it more than once.
Yeah, and you had customers that said, why would I go all that way just to catch trout, right? And what I always say to them is there's a couple of things. Number one, you can do it in our winter, right? Look outside.
Right, yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Today.
Okay?
January
it's February,
was,
right. To be able to step off the plane in Buenos Aires and then go over to the Andes and actually feel the sun and see flowers blooming and all that stuff within 20 hours, right? It's amazing to be able to change seasons in a day, right? So that's part of it. The other part of it, there's two other parts. One is the remoteness that you feel in Patagonia. Now, not everywhere, right? Because there's still places there that get too much angling pressure, right?
Okay.
But if you went to southern Patagonia, for example, the trout lodges like down in Rio Pico, it's south of Bariloche and Esquel, down that way. Suddenly, you're really in the remote areas, and you feel it, right? So you get a feeling that you have to work pretty hard here to get. And then the last thing is, and I know you want to talk about this with other destinations, but the cultural aspect is sort of subtle there, but I think a really important part of a trip.
Yeah.
Just things like when you're out fishing for trout and you're floating down a river and the guide says, hey, let's pull over and have lunch. And you say, yeah, cool. You pull over and the guide pulls out chairs, sets up the table, tablecloth, always red and white checkered tablecloth.
Yeah.
Would you like a glass of wine? Well, sure, I like a glass of wine. And it's so civilized, right? Yeah. You have dessert, of course, after you have your lunch. Do you want to have a rest for an hour, maybe take a nap? Sure, right? And there's no, it's kind of that Mediterranean sort of attitude to life, right?
Yeah.
And then you get back to lodge late, right? You get back to lodge at 8:30. You have another glass of wine, you have an appetizer, you eat dinner at 10:30, 11 maybe.
I'd be ready
right?
for bed.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So the cultural aspect, as I said, it's not blatantly crazy different when you go there versus maybe if you went to the Amazon, but it's a subtle change that it has a pretty big impression on a lot of people.
Yeah,
it does me.
Yeah, yeah. So what about I think we get asked more about sea run browns than we do trout fishing and I mean, we had one of my friends that used to work here. He did some just kind of dirt bagging around around South America fishing for sea run browns, and so I'm a little bit familiar about it. But it sounds like that it's like if you're into swinging flies for steelhead, that's pretty comparable.
Yeah,
and as far as catch rates and stuff like that, it's good.
It can be really good. They're still anadromous fish, right? So you still have to rely on them actually being there when they're supposed to be. And then, of course, you can go and it can be too hot and the river's low and, all that stuff. But typically it's a pretty reliable fishery. And in terms of catch rate, it's certainly higher than the average steelhead trip would be. And they're stunning fish, man. I mean, they really are. They're not like brown trout that you catch out of the mountain lakes in Argentina, right? I mean, they look markedly different, right? I mean, they have a little bit of you get lavender hints off of those fish, right? You know how you can see blue. Yeah, you know how you see a little bit of blue on a bonefish fin. You get the same thing out of these sea run browns, and they're spectacularly strong, and they do everything right. It's not for everybody. Right? As you said, if you're really into swinging a fly, right, it's fantastic. If you're really into wild places, it's fantastic because it's remote. You're going to Tierra del Fuego. You're going to the end of the earth, right? When you go down to that southern tip of Argentina and Chile. And it's exposed down there, right? You always hear about the wind. Well, it's windy, but there's no place to get out of the wind, right? So you have to be able to handle that. I can't. See, I've done it.
Yeah,
I'm done with it. That's not it. I don't need to go back there.
Yeah,
right. And I know people go every year and can't get enough of it. It's just it doesn't happen to be me.
Sure.
I told you the story about what I did on the trip, my first trip down there. The only trip I've ever done for sea run browns.
I don't know, but it'd be worth repeating.
Well, I probably did.
Because
I just don't have any patience for some things, right? So we were doing a little bit of an exploratory thing. So we weren't staying at a lodge right next to the river. We were having to drive. Right. And it was a pretty good drive, like an hour and a half or 2 hours over crazy roads.
Yeah.
And so the first day we go up there and we fish and it's fantastic. We all catch a couple fish and then suddenly it slows down. The sun's up, the wind is howling. It's just never below 40. It's just all the time, incessant wind. And the guide says, oh, by the way, he said, we're not going to catch any fish until like 6 tonight. Right. They're just not, they won't eat during the sunny part of the day. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell are we at?
Why are we there? Yeah.
Well, of course we're staying there because we drove 2 hours to get there.
Yeah.
So anyway, we pound the water all day long. We, 6 o'clock comes around, it starts getting a little bit better. We hook a few more fish. We drive back to the lodge. It's midnight. And then next day we get up to do it over again. Well, I'm prepared this time, right? So we fish the morning on the river. And then suddenly, again, sun comes up. And I hike up to the bluff. We're overlooking the river. I could see everybody watching me, swinging flies. What's Jon doing? Right? And I disappear. So pretty soon, I feel people around me up there because I'm in my sleeping bag. Right? I brought my sleeping bag.
Yeah.
I brought my beanie. I brought a book. Right? And I was lying on the tundra, with the truck behind me to block the wind, reading my book in my sleeping bag, and I was surrounded by all these guys and waiters just pissed at me because they're like, seriously?
They're like, you had this great idea.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us
about it, right? Because it's a long day, right? I mean, again,
especially if you're going to be up late and then get up early.
Right. Now again, that's not the typical deal. You know, most
Sure.
of those lodges have a beat close to the lodge or maybe in front of the lodge, and
Yeah.
coming back for lunch and doing it the right way.
Right.
Right. That was just too much for me. It was just too much for
And
me.
it's a week-long trip.
Yeah.
So how'd the rest of the week go?
It was the same. We caught fish. You know?
Did you recruit more into your
Yeah,
your
I did.
midday
Yeah,
nap
we were
group?
pretty soon. We were a bunch of dirtbags lying on the tundra out there. Yeah, sleeping and reading our books. But
Okay, so I mean, when we talk about the cultural experience, I mean, some places the cultural experience is a whole lot drastic.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
You're very aware that you're in a different place.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are maybe an angler that they're like, I want to have that. That's at the top of my list. That the fishing, it's a great excuse to go there. But I really want to meet some very interesting people that have a very different way of life. That I want to see things that I would just never see or experience. I mean, what have been a couple of those places where you're like, wow, this is just
well, there's
blowing my mind.
you have to kind of you first have to start it by saying, well, how comfortable am I with other cultures, and right?
Sure.
So am I going to the extreme, or do I want to, for example, have a European experience and be able to fish? Right. That's a pretty tame one.
Sure.
So it would be like going to Slovenia and going fishing, going to Croatia and going trout fishing, going to the Pyrenees in Spain and going fishing, but then ending up in Barcelona, right?
Yeah.
So you can have that kind of a really civilized sort of a mix, right? You can go the next step maybe and go to a place like we already talked about, going to Patagonia, where again you're really seeing something more wild, but getting that South American influence in that kind of trip, and then you can go the next step and you can go to a place like Kenjam in Brazil, right?
Okay.
Or Bolivia, to the rainforest there to fish for golden dorado. And then you're amongst really native people, Amazonian people.
Right.
And that's a whole, I mean, you're really, really out of your comfort zone then.
The last people on earth that don't have a Facebook account.
Yeah, exactly. Thank God.
The last 200.
Yeah. So I think it depends on your comfort zone, right? Some people are really ready to jump in, and go full tilt into a cultural experience. Others have to start slowly and make their way. I get that. And I think the other thing, and I know we talk a lot about this, is a lot of times a cultural sort of a trip is one that you want to do with a significant other, right? So maybe somebody that really isn't that much into fishing, and so you have to find that right place, right? Actually, I didn't mention Cuba in there. Cuba's actually a great place for the right people to go and have a cultural trip and a fishing trip as well. Yeah. And I think certainly Europe is, and I think to a degree South America. We send a lot of people down to Argentina and Chile, right? And they'll go down and they'll spend a couple days in Buenos Aires. They'll fish. Then they'll do, a fjord trip over on the Chilean coast and see whales and all that good stuff. They might end up in Mendoza for, go see wine country, Argentina's wine country. And so that's a great mix for that kind of couple.
So what about for so you book a trip through Flywater Travel, right? And they partner with, I don't know, how many different outfitters is it? Like
200 and something.
Oh my gosh. So a lot of different outfitters all over the world.
Yeah.
And you're going to go, so some of the places you go and though you might be in around an interesting culture, you might be a little bit insulated from that because of the situation of the lodge or maybe where you're at. Whereas maybe other times it might be just, you're immersed in it. So, give me a couple of examples of ones where like you really are like kind of immersed in it. It's just kind of it's really
I certainly think that the Bolivian gold dorado thing. Yeah. I mean, you're going to see it there. No question about it. Right. I went to Aguaboa Lodge in Brazil 2 years ago, and there you didn't see it. Right? I mean, it was markedly different. I mean, we had
because you fly in, you
fly in there, but there weren't native tribes there.
Yeah.
Right? And so we never saw a single other boat, right, besides the boats from the lodge when we were there for that week. We never saw another person. When you go to Bolivia and some of those other places like Kenjam that I mentioned earlier, you're on native land there. right? So you're around native villages. It's a requirement for those operations that they hire native boatmen, for example.
Okay.
So again, when you're fishing golden dorado in Bolivia, your boatman is a native from the village, right? So you're at lunchtime watching him use a bow and arrow to shoot fish to bring home to eat for dinner, right?
Sure.
Not golden dorado, but the fish that the golden dorado eat.
Yeah.
They're called sabalo, actually. So there it's in your face, right? Now, if you went to Patagonia, it's not in your face as much, right? So there you would have to say, we want to do days where it's not about fishing. We want to, we want to see gringo life. We want to go to a working ranch and watch them, shearing sheep, for example.
Yeah.
Or we want to do a kayak trip on one of the big lakes, or whatever. You have to work a little bit harder. Meaning that you just have to tell us first of all. So we send you to the right place,
right?
And you have to tell them at the lodge what you want to do so they can plan for it, right? But there's lots of opportunity there. But again, as I said, I think it's degrees of sort of what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, so I mean that's one of the things I really appreciate about Flywater. So I'm going next week. I go to Guatemala. Yeah. So when people see this, I'll have already been back. But we fly into Guatemala City, and one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to see the town of Antigua.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's just a beautiful town, and I mean, there's just really interesting cultural stuff there. And so we added a day onto the trip, and Flywater helped us with lodging and with all that different type of stuff, and so it made it pretty easy. So it's just a matter of telling them.
I mean. Boy, I sure say it a lot, right, to people, and that is that with the time that it takes to plan a trip, the money that it takes to go on the trip, and you fly all that way, it shouldn't be just about fishing. Right. I mean, especially in places where you've got the opportunity, like in a place like Guatemala, right, where it's pretty easy to see what life is like there, right? Yeah.
It's a 45-minute drive.
Yeah, you don't have to work that hard for it. And so why wouldn't you do it? And I think a lot of people make that mistake, honestly. And they come back from a trip and it's, all they have is pictures of the fish. Well, we love it. Of course, we love it. But there's a lot more that makes that trip, really rounds it out, I think.
Well, it's been awesome having you on the Gig Harbor Flycast. And so we're actually going to have another episode with Jon where we're going to talk just specifically about Cuba because him and I have done a ton of different trips down there, and we both love that island. It's a lot of fun. But Jon, so where can they follow you online? Get in touch with you. You're on social media.
Yeah, I'm on social media. You can go, Cuba Fishing Outfitters is my website where they can look specifically about Cuba. You can Google me up. I've got a bunch of different videos out there.
JonCovich.com?
Yeah, JonCovich.com. Or just Google up Jon Covich and travel or whatever. Or go directly to Flywater Travel.
And you're on Instagram as well?
I'm on Instagram and on Facebook, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff that we have to be on these days.
Well, so Jon, and we didn't talk about it, but Jon's an incredible photographer, and so definitely follow him on Instagram because he's got some great stuff. And so make sure you subscribe to the podcast on wherever you get your stuff, whether it's on Apple or on Google or whatever. And for those of you that are listening on audio, this has also been recorded on YouTube. So if you wanted to just check in on YouTube with us, and all of our interview podcasts are on YouTube as well. And so check out our channel at Gig Harbor Fly. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Blake.